It looked like a simple
Instead of
suspense show,
$85 a
but
week
behind
for a
Alfred
secretary,
Hitchcock Presents was a man who feared his own shadow, mocked his own creations, and used every episode as a mirror to expose the darkest corners of human nature. The host who pretended to stand above the story was actually haunted by the fear of losing control. The twists weren't designed to shock you. They were crafted to punish arrogance, and the shadows, the humor, the morality, they were all pieces of Hitchcock's inner world, stitched together to make you question yourself more than the characters on screen. These 15 untold truths will change the way you see the master of suspense forever. Now let's step behind the curtain of Hitchcock's mind. And before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications for more deep dives into classic television mysteries. Part 1. The strange storyteller who always stays outside his own stories. He appears as if he knows every secret, yet never steps in to save anyone. Every time Alfred Hitchcock shuffles into frame with that deliberate walk and almost expressionless face, no one realizes that inside him lives a repeating fear. The fear that his real presence will overshadow the story. That's why he chooses to stand outside it, only commenting, never intervening. Hitchcock always saw himself as a shadow on the wall, the one who switches on the light, but never steps into the lit area. And that distance creates a paradox. Viewers feel as if he controls everything, while he is actually the one person in the room who is not allowed to touch the character's fate. The negative obsession looping inside him is simple. If I enter the story, it will die. So he becomes one of the strangest hosts in television history. The man who tells the audience, "Don't trust what you're about to see," yet never rescues a single character from their doom. Part 2. The Hitchcock-Joan Harrison duo. The shadow behind so many scripts. He stood on the screen. She stood in the dark. Few people know that Joan Harrison, his longtime assistant and screenwriter, was the one who helped Hitchcock maintain coherence in the universe of crime he created. Harrison constantly wrestled with the fear that the Hitchcock style would be copied in a cheap way, making viewers lose faith. Every time he asked, "Make it more subtle," Harrison felt that old pressure return, the fear of being seen as just Hitchcock's shadow. And yet the scripts she polished were so effective that he eventually had to admit, "Without Joan, I couldn't preserve the show's mystery." Harrison became the quiet soul of the series, the one who made sure Alfred Hitchcock Presents wasn't just about fear, but also about moral lessons wrapped in dry, ironic humor. Part 3. The philosophy that the audience is always wrong, and the pleasure of deceiving them. He wanted them to guess wrong. He wanted them to believe in things that were never there. Deep inside, Hitchcock carried a constant suspicion. People are too ready to believe what they want to believe. To prove it, he crafted harmless-looking openings, then built endings that crushed everything the viewer assumed. The negative thought that kept repeating in him was, "If the audience guesses it, then I've failed." So every episode was constructed in a deliberately provocative way. They weren't just crime stories, they were psychological traps he laid so the viewers would walk into them by themselves. What pleased him most? Those moments when the audience became victims of their own expectations. Just as he liked to say, there is no crime more terrible than blind trust. Part 4. The shadows he drew weren't meant to frighten, but to reflect himself. He feared the dark, just as he feared his own inner world. As a child, Hitchcock was obsessed with darkness. His father once had him locked in a police cell for a few minutes so he'd know what prison feels like. That fear repeated throughout his life and pushed him to create images where every shadow seemed to have an intention. In many episodes, the characters see a silhouette before they see the actual person. That wasn't just a stylistic trick to make things scarier, it was Hitchcock's memory. Darkness always shows up before horror does. He used those shadows as a way of talking to the child inside him, the one who thought, if I can stare straight into the dark, maybe it won't swallow me. Part 5. Why he always opened by mocking CBS and his own show. Ridicule was the armor of a man who refused to show his real fear. Hitchcock's snarky introductions weren't just there to get laughs. They were disguises for his quiet insecurity about American television. He was afraid the audience wouldn't understand him, afraid his very British style would be seen as odd, afraid the name Hitchcock would become a brand instead of an art form. So he attacked first, mocking the sponsors, teasing the network, satirizing the very episode about to air. That recurring sarcasm allowed him to regain control of the viewer's emotions before the story even began. Part 6. Young directors who saw Hitchcock as an unpassable wall. He stood there like a standard no one could surpass. Though he didn't personally direct every episode, Hitchcock's shadow hovered over every creative decision. Young directors on the show went through the same repeating anxiety. Does Hitchcock think I'm incompetent? Will he tear this idea apart? Is he silently watching me from somewhere on the set? That persistent fear of Hitchcock's shadow often felt suffocating, but it also pushed them to sharpen every frame, every cut, raising the series far above most crime shows of the time. Part 7. The episode he hated most was the one viewers loved. Sometimes the work he disliked most revealed the most about him. There was an episode Hitchcock admitted he didn't like how the story ended. Yet that very episode sparked some of the most intense viewer discussion because it exposed something he usually hid: helplessness. The all-knowing storyteller still couldn't save anyone. He couldn't change the ending. He couldn't give the character a second chance. Hitchcock saw it as an artistic failure. The audience saw something else. Alfred Hitchcock himself, a man who stands outside every story, tortured by his desire to fix things for his characters and his inability to actually do it. Part 8. The twist ending wasn't just for shock, but to punish arrogance. The cleverest ones were always the easiest to destroy. Hitchcock believed arrogance was the root of most tragedy. That's why, in so many episodes, the most confident character is the one who ends up completely destroyed. This becomes a recurring callback throughout the series. Whoever believes they can't be wrong makes the deadliest mistake. Whoever believes they control everything is drowned by the smallest overlooked detail. For Hitchcock, the twist ending wasn't just a surprise, it was justice dealt out to pride. Part 9. The exaggerated details were often based on real police files. He didn't invent crime. He just edited it so you could swallow it. Many Alfred Hitchcock Presents stories took inspiration from real-life crimes, but Hitchcock had to soften them to avoid being too horrifying for American television. That choice exposed a repeating fear inside him. If he told the truth exactly as it was, the audience wouldn't be able to handle it. So he turned crimes into metaphors, turned suffering into mind games, turned brutal reality into moral tales. In his mind, the most terrifying thing wasn't the crime itself. It was how indifferent people could be to it. Part 10. His dark humor was how he controlled his fear of death. He laughed at death so he wouldn't tremble in front of it. Hitchcock constantly used black comedy to transform frightening situations into bitter jokes. But behind that style lay a deeply personal fear, the fear of dying without leaving a mark. So he forged a unique tone. He didn't hide death, but turned it into something both painful and funny. He didn't dodge tragedy, but laced it with dry, unnerving humor. That was how he kept an old dread at bay. The idea that death comes most suddenly when you feel safest. Part 11. The Hollywood stars who joined the show because they feared Hitchcock's disapproval. Being praised by him was an honor. Being forgotten by him felt like a disaster. Hitchcock was known for not being great with actors' names, but if he remembered yours, it meant you had really made an impression. Many stars came onto the show, driven by a repeating fear. Fear that Hitchcock would think they weren't good enough for television. Fear of being seen as someone who couldn't handle tension-driven acting. Fear of missing their one chance to work with the master of suspense. They appeared not for money or exposure, but to step into Hitchcock's world, even if only for a few minutes. Part 12. The audience never knew Hitchcock saw himself as the most tragic character. He mocked others, but saw himself in his doomed men and women. In many episodes, the villains are misunderstood people or individuals so consumed by obsession that they self-destruct. Hitchcock recognized himself in them. He was afraid he controlled too much, afraid of becoming isolated, afraid that artistic power would cut him off from normal human feeling. Those characters who sink into their own obsessions are versions of Hitchcock he kept locked inside and released through the stories. Part 13. Why every episode ends with an ironic little moral. He taught morality by mocking morality. Hitchcock believed people only remember a lesson if it leaves them uncomfortable. His recurring fear was that viewers would watch the show and walk away without thinking. So he added those closing monologues, dripping with irony, a little moral, a little mockery, a little sting. He wanted the audience to leave each episode thinking, I think I've just learned something, but why does it make me feel uneasy? Part 14. Television's limits forced him to be more creative. When he couldn't scare you with blood, he scared you with your imagination. American TV in the 50s and 60s didn't allow graphic violence. That created a constant, negative pressure on Hitchcock. How do I make them afraid without really showing anything? His answer turned Alfred Hitchcock Presents into a masterclass in suggestion. A slammed door is scarier than a gunshot. A shadow is more unsettling than a knife. A line spoken in a flat tone can chill more than a murder scene. Hitchcock turned limitations into weapons, and television, in his hands, sometimes became more frightening than cinema. Part 15. The Final Secret. He didn't want people to fear the story. He wanted them to fear themselves. Hitchcock once said, I don't tell stories to frighten you. I tell stories so you'll frighten yourself. His greatest recurring fear was that people would never question themselves. So each episode acts like a mirror. One wrong choice, one small lie, one impulsive moment, 1 second of lost control. He makes his characters pay by confronting the darkest version of themselves, so the audience realizes that evil doesn't just come from monsters or criminals. It comes from the things we think are harmless. That's why Alfred Hitchcock Presents endures. It doesn't just mine fear from the outside world. It wakes up the little monster each person keeps inside.